The Korean mafia boss took his mother to a restaurant on New Year's Eve and met a black woman who changed everything. "Sir," I said, "we're fully booked." Zora Johnson didn't know she'd just denied a table to the most dangerous man in the city. Didn't know his mother was clutching his arm, whispering in Korean that he needed to control his temper in public. All she knew was her restaurant was packed to capacity on New Year's Eve, and the man in the custom suit was glaring at her like she'd personally insulted his ancestors. And she'd just made either the bravest or stupidest decision of her life. The man, Min-ho Park, didn't move. His mother's grip tightened on his arm. And from that moment, Zora's life was marked. If you believe in standing your ground, no matter how intimidating someone seems, hit subscribe. Entitled people with God complexes won't. Let's show them that nobody gets special treatment just because they think they're above the rules. Zora Johnson had owned Fusion for exactly 2 years, long enough to establish her restaurant as the hottest reservation in the city and to develop a sixth sense about trouble. She could identify potential dine-in dashers before they ordered appetizers, knew which food critics were trying to remain anonymous, and had perfected the art of diplomatically handling drunk patrons on holiday nights. This man, though, he was something entirely different. She surveyed her completely packed dining room, every table reserved months in advance for New Year's Eve, while maintaining eye contact with Min-ho Park. His perfectly tailored suit probably cost more than her monthly rent. His watch, a Patek Philippe, could pay off her remaining culinary school loans. But it was his eyes that held her attention. Cold, calculating, and unused to hearing the word no. "Perhaps there's been a misunderstanding," he said, his English perfect but with a slight accent that rounded the edges of his words. "I called ahead. Park. Table for 2. Sir, we have no reservation under that name. As you can see, we're completely booked for New Year's Eve. I can take your number and call you if we have a cancellation, but unacceptable." One word, delivered with such quiet authority that conversations at nearby tables faltered. The elderly woman beside him spoke sharply in Korean, her tone unmistakably maternal despite the language barrier. Min-ho's jaw tightened, but something in his posture shifted. Not exactly softening, but perhaps a fraction less intimidating. I watched Zora stand there, spine straight, refusing to be cowed. And that's when I knew this wasn't going to end the way Min-ho Park expected. Because what he didn't know, couldn't know, was that Zora Johnson hadn't clawed her way up from nothing, graduated top of her class at Le Cordon Bleu, and built a successful restaurant by the age of 32 just to be intimidated by another entitled man who thought rules didn't apply to him. The elderly woman spoke again, this time in accented but clear English. "My son forgets his manners. I am Mrs. Park. It is our fault for not confirming. Perhaps another night." Zora's expression softened slightly at the woman's dignity. And that's when inspiration struck. "I don't have a regular table, but I do have the chef's table in the kitchen. It's not typically used on busy nights like this, but if you wouldn't mind the noise and heat of a working kitchen, you're welcome to it." Mrs. Park's face lit up. "The chef's table. How wonderful. We accept, don't we, Min-ho?" Min-ho Park looked like he'd rather eat glass than sit in a kitchen. But one look at his mother's excitement and he gave a curt nod. That would be acceptable. Acceptable. Like he was doing Zora a favor. I wanted to laugh. Here was a man who commanded an empire built on blood and fear. A man whose name made hardened criminals tremble, reduced to accepting a compromise because his tiny mother said so. "Follow me," Zora said, leading them through the packed dining room, aware of the whispers that followed. Not because anyone recognized Min-ho Park. His power operated in shadows, not spotlight, but because they were being led to the mythical chef's table that most regulars didn't even know existed. What Zora didn't know, couldn't know, was that Min-ho Park controlled most of the city's underground economy. Illegal gambling, protection rackets, smuggling, money laundering, all filtered through seemingly legitimate businesses. What she couldn't know was that 3 of the diners in her restaurant that night were his men, positioned strategically to protect him even during a simple dinner with his mother. She couldn't know that by standing her ground, she just earned both his irritation and, more dangerously, his interest. If you think women shouldn't have to smile and accommodate demanding men just because they're intimidating, smash that subscribe button. Only cowards who rely on fear to get their way would disagree. The kitchen was a symphony of controlled chaos. Line cooks calling orders, the sizzle of pans, the rhythmic chopping of knives against cutting boards. The chef's table sat in a small alcove, offering a view of the entire operation while remaining just removed enough for conversation. Zora seated Mrs. Park with careful attention, then gestured to Minho's chair without pulling it out for him. A small rebellion, but I saw the slight narrowing of his eyes. He noticed too. "Yuri will be your server tonight," Zora said, gesturing to a young woman who approached with water and menus. "I'll check on you periodically to make sure everything meets your expectations." "You will not be serving us yourself?" Minho asked, his tone making it clear he expected special attention. "I'm the owner and head chef, Mr. Park. On New Year's Eve, I belong in the kitchen." His mother smiled. "Of course. We are honored to watch you work. This is better than any table in the dining room." Minho said nothing, just studied Zora with that unreadable expression. Not used to being challenged. Not used to women who didn't immediately bend to his will. And definitely not used to being genuinely unimportant to someone. What happened next surprised me, though maybe it shouldn't have. Mrs. Park began asking questions. Intelligent, specific questions about techniques she observed, about flavor combinations, about the cultural influences in Zora's cooking. And Zora, despite the chaos of a holiday service, found herself responding with increasing enthusiasm. "This fusion of Korean and Southern techniques is fascinating," Mrs. Park said, watching Zora plate a dish with practiced precision. "It reminds me of home, but also something entirely new." "My grandmother was from Georgia," Zora explained, drizzling sauce in a perfect arc. "She taught me that food is history and love combined. When I studied Korean cuisine during my training, I found so many surprising parallels. The importance of fermentation, the balance of flavors, the reverence for traditional techniques while still innovating." Minho watched this exchange silently, his eyes never leaving Zora's hands as she worked. I could see the calculation happening behind his eyes. Reassessing, reevaluating. This woman wasn't just a stubborn restaurant owner. She was talented, passionate, and she knew things about his culture that surprised him. As the night progressed, something shifted. Minho began asking his own questions about business, about how she'd started her restaurant, about her training in Paris. His questions were precise, almost like an interview, but Zora answered each one without hesitation, her confidence evident even as she directed her kitchen through the busiest service of the year. When their food arrived, dishes Zora had specially selected and prepared herself. Mrs. Park took one bite of a particular dish and went completely still. "This tastes like my childhood," she said softly, her eyes suddenly bright with unshed tears. "How did you know?" Zora smiled. "The gochujang in that dish is from a small producer outside Seoul. They still make it the traditional way. When I visited Korea to study regional cuisine, I stayed with a family who served something similar. The grandmother taught me her technique. My mother made this exact dish," Mrs. Park said, her voice thick with emotion. "Before the war, before we lost everything. I haven't tasted it exactly like this since I was a child." I watched Minho's face in that moment. Watched as something like genuine surprise, followed by something dangerously close to respect, crossed his features. This woman, this chef who had denied him a table and made him sit in a kitchen, had just given his mother something he couldn't buy with all his money and power. A taste of a home that no longer existed. Only those who appreciate the power of cultural exchange will understand the value of this moment. Hit subscribe if you believe food is the universal language that bridges all differences. Those who can't see beyond their own experience won't get it. The night was progressing smoothly, surprisingly so, when I saw them enter. 3 men, overdressed for the venue, scanning the dining room with predatory efficiency. Minho saw them too, his body tensing subtly as his hand moved toward his jacket. His mother noticed the change immediately, her expression shifting from contentment to concern. "Minho," she said quietly in Korean. "Not tonight, please." Zora, returning to check on them, caught the sudden tension. "Is everything all right with your meal?" "Perfect," Minho said, his eyes still on the dining room. But I think we should settle our bill now. My mother is getting tired. Zora followed his gaze, instantly spotting the men who didn't fit. Restaurant owners develop a sixth sense about trouble, and these men radiated it. Without missing a beat, she made a decision. Actually, there's something special I'd like to prepare for dessert. It will take about 20 minutes. Perhaps your mother would like to see my herb garden on the rooftop while you wait. The view of the city is spectacular, and we'll be able to see the early fireworks. Mrs. Park understood immediately. I would love that. Min-ho, you settle the bill while Ms. Johnson shows me this garden. Before Min-ho could object, Zora had smoothly guided Mrs. Park toward a service elevator at the back of the kitchen, away from the dining room and the men who were now making their way toward the kitchen. Min-ho had seconds to decide. Let his mother go with this woman he barely knew, or risk a confrontation with rivals in a crowded restaurant on New Year's Eve. I watched him make a decision I suspect surprised even him. He let them go, then turned to face whatever was coming. What Zora couldn't know as she led Mrs. Park to the rooftop garden was that she just inserted herself into a blood feud that had been simmering for generations. What she couldn't know was that Min-ho was using this dinner with his mother as cover for a meeting that was supposed to happen later that night. A meeting with the very men who had just walked into her restaurant with murder in their eyes. If you believe that sometimes the most courageous act is protecting strangers without even knowing why they need protection, hit that subscribe button. Only those who turn a blind eye to others in danger will scroll past. On the rooftop, with the city lights spread before them like fallen stars, Mrs. Park took Zora's hand. My son is not who you think he is. I don't think anything about your son, Mrs. Park. I don't know him. But you will, the elderly woman said with surprising certainty. And when you do, remember this moment. Remember that he let you take me away to safety while he stayed to face danger. Remember that he could have used me as a shield, but he chose to stand alone. Zora frowned. I don't understand. You don't need to. Not yet. Mrs. Park moved through the small garden, touching herbs with knowing fingers. You grow perilla and Korean mint. These are not common in American gardens. I try to grow what I can't easily buy, Zora explained, still trying to process the older woman's cryptic warning. Authentic ingredients make all the difference. Yes, Mrs. Park said thoughtfully. Authenticity makes all the difference. In food, in business, in people. When they returned to the kitchen 15 minutes later, Min-ho was waiting calmly, no sign of the men who had entered earlier. The kitchen staff worked as if nothing had happened, but Zora noticed a tension in the air, a slight disarray that hadn't been there before. Is everything all right? She asked carefully. Perfect, Min-ho said, rising to take his mother's arm. But I'm afraid we must go now. How much do I owe you for this exceptional meal? Zora named a price that made Mrs. Park's eyebrows rise, but Min-ho didn't even blink, counting out cash from a money clip that would have paid Zora's rent for half a year. No need for change, he said, handing her a business card along with the money. If you ever need anything at all, call this number. Their fingers touched during the exchange, and I swear I saw something electric pass between them. A recognition, perhaps, or a warning. Happy New Year, Mr. Park, Zora said, pocketing the card without looking at it. Mrs. Park, it was truly an honor to cook for you. The honor was ours, the elderly woman said, reaching up to pat Zora's cheek in a surprisingly maternal gesture. We will see you again soon. As they left through the kitchen's service exit, Zora returned to the chaos of her restaurant, trying to make sense of the strange evening. It wasn't until hours later, after the last customers had left, after the champagne toast with her staff at midnight, after the kitchen was cleaned to her exacting standards, that she remembered the card in her pocket. It wasn't a business card, not exactly. Just heavy cream cardstock with a phone number embossed in black. No name, no company, just 10 digits that would change her life forever. Truth is the foundation of any relationship worth having. Subscribe if you believe that starting with secrets only guarantees ending with regrets. Liars won't hit that button. 3 days passed before curiosity got the better of Zora. 3 days of running her restaurant, of trying to forget the intensity of Minho's gaze, of wondering what Mrs. Park had meant. 3 days of telling herself that getting involved with a man who clearly had dangerous connections was the stupidest idea imaginable. On the 4th day, she called the number. He answered on the first ring. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't call. No hello. No introduction." As if he'd been sitting by his phone for days, waiting. Maybe he had been. "How did you know it was me?" Zora asked, immediately annoyed with herself for engaging instead of hanging up. "I don't give this number to many people." A pause. "My mother hasn't stopped talking about your food. She insists I take her back to your restaurant. We're booked solid for the next 2 months." "I assumed as much." Another pause. "Perhaps you'd consider a private consultation? My mother's birthday is approaching, and I'd like to surprise her with a special meal." It was a transparent excuse, and they both knew it. But it was also a safe way for Zora to satisfy her curiosity without committing to anything personal. "I occasionally do private chef work," she said carefully, "though my rates are considerable. Money is not an issue." Of course it wasn't. Men like Minho Park didn't worry about money. They worried about loyalty, territory, reputation, but never money. They arranged to meet at his office the following afternoon. A consultation strictly professional. At least, that's what Zora told herself as she spent an extra 30 minutes on her appearance before heading to the address he'd provided. The building was in the financial district, all glass and steel and understated wealth. Park International Import-Export occupied the top 3 floors. The security in the lobby was more intensive than at most government buildings, but Zora was expected. A private elevator whisked her to the 50th floor, where a woman who looked more like a model than a receptionist greeted her by name. "Mr. Park is expecting you, Ms. Johnson. This way, please." Minho's office was exactly what Zora had expected. Minimalist, expensive, with floor-to-ceiling windows offering a panoramic view of the city. What she hadn't expected was to find him alone, jacket off, sleeves rolled up, revealing forearms covered in intricate tattoos. Traditional Korean imagery intertwined with symbols she didn't recognize. He caught her looking and smoothly rolled down his sleeves. "Thank you for coming, Ms. Johnson." "Zora," she corrected. "If we're going to work together, you should use my first name. Zora." He tested the name carefully. "Then you must call me Minho." They spent the next hour discussing his mother's birthday dinner. Favorite foods, dietary restrictions, childhood dishes she might appreciate. All very professional, very appropriate. But underneath the conversation ran an electric current neither of them acknowledged. As Zora prepared to leave, contract signed for an exorbitant sum that would cover her restaurant's rent for 3 months, Minho finally addressed the elephant in the room. "You're curious about what happened at your restaurant." It wasn't a question, but Zora answered anyway. "I'm curious about a lot of things, Minho. Like why your mother warned me about you. Like why men who looked like hired muscle walked into my restaurant looking for you. Like why you carry enough cash to buy a car in your pocket." He studied her for a long moment. "If I told you, you would never contact me again. Try me." But he didn't. He simply walked her to the elevator, his hand hovering near the small of her back without quite touching her. "I'll have my assistant send the first payment today. For the deposit." As the elevator doors closed, Zora realized he hadn't answered a single one of her questions. And worse, she was still going to cook for him anyway. Over the next 2 weeks, Zora found herself exchanging texts with Minho almost daily. Ostensibly about the upcoming dinner menu questions, wine pairings, serving preferences, but gradually evolving into conversations about food philosophy, about growing up between cultures, about the weight of family expectations. "My father wanted me to become a doctor," she texted one night after a grueling service. "He still introduces me as his daughter who went to culinary school for now." "My father wanted me to become him," came the reply. "I succeeded too well." There was history there, pain there, that Zora couldn't decipher. But she recognized the weight of it, the same weight she carried from her own complicated family legacy. They met for coffee the following Sunday. "Just to finalize details," Minho said. "Just to confirm the menu," Zora replied. They both knew they were lying. The coffee shop was small, tucked away in a neighborhood Zora rarely visited. Minho was already there when she arrived, 2 cups on the table before him. "Oat milk latte with an extra shot," he said, pushing one toward her. "You mentioned it was your regular order." "You remembered." She was surprised, though she shouldn't have been. Minho struck her as someone who remembered everything. "I remember everything about you," he said simply, confirming her thought in a way that sent a shiver down her spine. They talked for hours, coffee growing cold, patrons coming and going around them. Minho told her about growing up in Korea until age 10, then immigrating to America. About the struggle to assimilate while his parents insisted on maintaining their culture at home. About his father's determination to build a business empire from nothing. "He succeeded," Zora said, gesturing subtly at Minho's watch. "His shoes, the subtle markers of wealth he couldn't fully disguise even in casual clothes." "Yes," Minho agreed, "but the cost was high." "It usually is," Zora said, thinking of her own journey. The student loans, the 60-hour weeks as a line cook, the relationships sacrificed for her career. Nothing worth having comes easily. Something shifted in Minho's expression. "You understand sacrifice. Everyone who builds something does." But even as they connected over shared experiences, Zora couldn't ignore the gaps in his story. The vague references to his family business. The careful way he avoided specifics about his father's methods. The slight tension that entered his body whenever the door opened, as if he was constantly expecting trouble. Coffee led to dinner later that week. Dinner led to a walk along the riverfront. The walk led to Minho driving Zora home, the silence in his luxury car comfortable rather than awkward. "I'd like to see you again," he said as they pulled up to her apartment building. "Not to discuss the catering." Zora looked at him, really looked at him. The danger was evident in everything about him. The vigilant eyes, the controlled power in his movements, the way his driver kept the car running as if they might need to leave quickly. But so was the interest, the respect, the genuine connection that had been building between them. "I'd like that," she said finally. "But Minho, eventually, you're going to have to trust me with the truth." Something like regret flickered across his face. "Some truths are dangerous, Zora. I'm tougher than I look." His smile was sad. "I know you are. That's what worries me. If you believe that the most dangerous relationships are the ones worth fighting for, hit subscribe. Those afraid to risk their hearts for something Rael won't understand." Mrs. Park's birthday dinner was a triumph. Zora and 2 of her most trusted sous chefs transformed Minho's sleek penthouse into an intimate restaurant for 12. Mrs. Park, Minho, and 10 elderly Korean women who had been Mrs. Park's friends since childhood. The menu was a journey through Korean culinary history, each dish triggering memories and stories that Zora, working in the open-concept kitchen, could hear and appreciate. Mrs. Park cried when Zora presented the final course, a modernized version of the childhood dish that had moved her to tears on New Year's Eve. The elderly woman rose from her seat, crossed to the kitchen, and embraced Zora with surprising strength. "You have given me back pieces of myself I thought were lost forever," she said, her accent thicker with emotion. "My son was right to find you." After the guests left, after the staff packed up and departed, Zora found herself alone with Minho. He handed her a glass of rare whiskey, their fingers brushing in a way that felt deliberate. "That was beyond what I imagined," he said, his usual composure softened by genuine gratitude. "My mother hasn't been that happy in years. I'm glad." Zora sipped the whiskey, letting the warmth spread through her chest. Food is memory and emotion made tangible. Sometimes we forget how powerful that can be. They moved to his balcony. The city spread before them like a carpet of lights. For a long moment, they simply stood there, shoulders nearly touching, sharing the comfortable silence they discovered they both valued. "My father died 3 years ago," Minho said finally, breaking the quiet. "He built an empire from nothing, but his methods were not always ethical." Zora remained silent, sensing this was just the beginning of a confession he needed to make. "When we came to America, we had nothing. Immigrants with broken English and few marketable skills. But my father had connections back in Korea, connections to people who operated outside the law. Minho's knuckles whitened around his glass. He started by helping Korean businesses with protection, with loans banks wouldn't provide, with navigating a system designed to exclude them. But power corrupts, and success breeds ambition. He became the very thing he originally fought against, Zora guessed. Minho nodded, his profile sharp against the city lights. By the time I was in college, Park International was a legitimate import-export business on paper. But beneath that facade was an organization that controlled most of the Korean underground economy in this city. Gambling, loans, protection. All the things my father had once offered as community support had become profitable enterprises built on fear and obligation. And now it's yours, Zora said. Not a question but a statement. Yes. Minho turned to face her fully. I inherited an empire built on blood and fear, Zora. The men in your restaurant that night? Rivals who believe I'm weak because I've been trying to legitimize our operations. They came to send a message. They would have hurt anyone in their path to deliver it. But they didn't, Zora pointed out. Something stopped them. Minho's smile was cold. I did. The implications hung in the air between them. Zora didn't ask for details. Some questions were better left unasked. Why are you telling me this now? She said instead. Because if whatever is happening between us continues, you need to know who I am. What I am. His voice was flat. And you need to decide if that's something you can live with. Zora took another sip of whiskey, buying time to process. The rational part of her brain was screaming to run, to cut all ties with this man who had just confessed to being essentially a mafia boss. But her heart, her stubborn, curious heart, was stuck on the fact that he told her the truth when he didn't have to. That he was giving her the choice. I need time to think about this, she said finally. Of course. Minho stepped back, creating physical distance to match the emotional chasm his confession had opened. Take all the time you need. If I don't hear from you again, I'll understand. But as Zora gathered her things to leave, Mrs. Park appeared in the hallway, still radiant from her celebration. You're leaving, my dear? Let Minho's driver take you home. It's late. I'll call a car, Mrs. Park. It's no trouble. The elderly woman waved away her protest. Nonsense. Minho, tell your driver to take Ms. Johnson home safely. And just like that, Zora found herself back in Minho's luxury car, his driver silently navigating the late-night streets, while she tried to reconcile the man she'd been getting to know with the criminal leader he'd just revealed himself to be. When they reached her apartment, the driver got out to open her door. A courtesy she found excessive but had learned not to refuse. As she stepped onto the sidewalk, something caught the driver's attention. He tensed, hand moving inside his jacket, eyes scanning the darkened street. Get back in the car, he said sharply. Now. Before Zora could process his words, the night erupted in violence. Gunshots, the driver pushing her down, returning fire, shouting in Korean into a phone. Seconds stretched into an eternity of terror before screeching tires announced the attacker's retreat. The driver helped her up, his manner professional despite the blood seeping from a graze on his arm. Are you hurt? Zora shook her head, too shocked to speak. Mr. Park is on his way. Let's get you inside where it's safe. Minho arrived in 7 minutes. She knew because she counted every second as she sat on her couch, trying to stop her hands from shaking. He burst through the door that his driver had been guarding, his usual composure shattered. Zora! He crossed to her in 3 strides, hands hovering over her as if afraid to touch her. Are you injured? Did they hurt you? And no. Her voice cracked. Your driver. He saved me. He's hurt though. Jean will be fine. Minho finally touched her, just a gentle hand on her shoulder. I am so sorry. This is exactly what I feared. They were watching me. They saw us together. They think you're important to me. Am I? Zora asked, the shock making her bolder than she might otherwise have been. Important to you? Minho's expression shifted, vulnerability breaking through his carefully constructed facade. Yes, more than I wanted to admit, more than is safe for either of us. And that's when Zora knew she was in too deep to walk away. Not because of the danger or the excitement, but because beneath the dangerous exterior of Minho Park was a man trying to outrun his father's legacy. A man who loved his mother fiercely. A man who had just shown more genuine emotion over her safety than any boyfriend she'd ever had. "I need you to leave," she said finally, standing on shaky legs. "I need space to process all this. But Minho, I'm not running away. Not yet." The relief on his face was painful to witness. He nodded once, then turned to go, issuing rapid instructions to Jean in Korean. "I'll have men watching your apartment and restaurant," he said from the doorway. "You won't see them, but they'll be there. You'll be safe." "I don't need protection," Zora protested automatically. Minho's smile was tired. "After tonight? Yes, Zora. You do. Sometimes the people who need love the most are those who seem least deserving." Hit subscribe if you believe everyone deserves a chance to be better than their circumstances. Only those without compassion would disagree. For a week, Zora didn't contact Minho. She focused on her restaurant, on creating new menu items, on the comfortable routine that had defined her life before New Year's Eve. But she felt the eyes on her, the subtle protection Minho had promised. A black sedan that appeared whenever she left work late. The same faces recurring in her dining room, never ordering much, always watching the door. She should have been terrified. Instead, she found herself researching Korean organized crime, the history of immigrant protection rackets in America, the fine line between community support and criminal enterprise. On the 8th day, she called him. "I want to see you," she said without preamble when he answered. "Tonight, at my place." He arrived alone, though Zora suspected his security wasn't far. He brought no gifts, made no attempts to charm or distract her, just stood in her small living room, waiting for her judgment. "I've been thinking about what you told me," she began, gesturing for him to sit. "About your father's business. About what you inherited. And," his voice was carefully neutral, "and I want to know what you're doing with it. Are you continuing his legacy? Or are you creating your own?" Something like hope flickered in Minho's eyes. "I've been trying to legitimize our operations, moving investments into legal enterprises, cutting ties with the more violent aspects of the business. That's why those men came to your restaurant. They see change as weakness. Is it working? The legitimate path?" Slowly, Minho spread his hands. "It's complicated. Some people depend on the protection we provide. Some businesses would fail without our support. I can't just abandon them. But the violence, the fear, that has to stop. I'm trying." For the first time, Minho looked truly vulnerable. "It's taking longer than I hoped. The old guard resists change. My father's allies expect me to be him. My rivals smell blood in the water." Zora studied him, looking for lies, for manipulation. She found only exhaustion and a desperate kind of hope. "I don't approve of what you do," she said finally. "But I believe you're trying to change it. And I want to see where this goes, where we go, if we give it a chance." The tension drained from Minho's body. "You're sure? After what happened?" "Because of what happened," Zora corrected. "You were honest when you could have lied. You gave me a choice when you could have kept me in the dark. That matters to me, Minho." He crossed the space between them, taking her hands in his. "I will keep you safe, Zora. I promise you that." "I don't need you to keep me safe," she said firmly. "I need you to keep making better choices. To be the man your mother believes you can be." Minho's smile was slow, genuine in a way that transformed his face. "I can try to be that man. For both of you." What Zora couldn't know, couldn't possibly predict, was how her presence in Minho's life would accelerate his plans to legitimize his business. Couldn't know that her restaurant would become the model for a chain of upscale Korean fusion establishments that would provide the perfect front for laundering the last of his illegal proceeds while creating actual legitimate income. Couldn't know that her stubborn insistence on doing things the right way would inspire Minho to finally cut ties with the most violent aspects of his inherited empire, regardless of the short-term consequences. All she knew, as she let him pull her into an embrace that felt both dangerous and like coming home, was that sometimes the most unexpected connections were the ones worth fighting for. If you think true love doesn't change who you are, but reveals who you were meant to become, hit that subscribe button. Those afraid of transformation will never understand what they're missing. The next 3 months were a careful dance. Minho introduced Zora to parts of his world gradually. The legitimate parts, his import business partners, his mother's extensive social circle, the Korean Cultural Center where he served on the board of directors. In return, Zora brought him deeper into her world. Her restaurant kitchen during prep hours, her favorite farmers at the local markets, the community cooking classes she taught for underprivileged teens. 2 separate worlds, slowly merging. 2 people carefully learning each other's boundaries. It wasn't perfect. Minho still disappeared for days on business that he didn't fully explain. Zora still maintained her independence, refusing security when she felt it unnecessary, insisting on paying her own way despite the obvious disparity in their financial situations. They fought sometimes, spectacular arguments about his overprotectiveness or her stubbornness. But they always found their way back to each other, the connection between them growing stronger with each reconciliation. Until the night everything shattered. Zora was closing her restaurant, the last of her staff having left an hour earlier, when the front door burst open. 3 men she didn't recognize, faces hard, movements predatory. "Ms. Johnson," the leader said, his accent thick. "We need you to come with us." "My restaurant is closed," she said calmly, though her heart was racing. "You need to leave." The man smiled unpleasantly. "This isn't a request. Minho Park has something that belongs to us. You're how we get it back." Zora's mind raced. The panic button under the bar was 3 steps away. Minho's security, if they were still watching, would be outside. She just needed to stall. "Let me get my coat," she said, moving slowly toward the bar. "Don't move." The man raised a gun and Zora froze. "We know all about Park's security measures. His men outside are already dealt with. You have no one coming to save you." Fear turned Zora's blood to ice. But beneath the fear was anger. Anger that these men thought they could use her. Anger that Minho's world had crashed into hers despite all his promises of protection. Anger that she was being reduced to leverage in a game she never asked to play. "Fine," she said, letting the fear show while hiding the anger. "I'll come with you. Just don't hurt me." The leader nodded to his companions, who moved to flank her. As they approached, Zora made her decision. She wasn't going to be a victim. She wasn't going to be bait. She wasn't going to be the reason Minho returned to the violent ways he was trying to leave behind. Her hand closed around the knife she'd been using to prep garnishes. In one fluid motion, she threw it at the overhead lights, plunging the restaurant into darkness. Then she moved, diving behind the bar, hitting the panic button, grabbing the baseball bat she kept for security. Confusion erupted. Shouts in a language she didn't understand. A gunshot that sent glass shattering somewhere to her right. Zora crawled along the floor, using the layout she knew by heart to her advantage. She made it to the kitchen before they caught her. A hand grabbed her ankle, dragging her back. She swung the bat blindly, connecting with something that yielded with a satisfying crunch and a howl of pain. But there were 3 of them and only one of her. A blow to her temple sent her sprawling, the bat clattering from her grip. Rough hands pulled her upright, a gun pressed to her ribs. "That was stupid," the leader hissed, blood streaming from his nose where her bat had connected. "Now you've made this personal." They dragged her toward the back door. Zora fought every step, knowing that if they got her into a vehicle, her chances of survival plummeted. One of the men opened the door and staggered back with a knife protruding from his throat. Minho stood in the doorway, a vision from a nightmare. Gone was the polished businessman Zora had come to know. This was someone else entirely, cold-eyed, precise in his violence, moving with deadly efficiency as he engaged the remaining 2 men. It happened so fast that Zora's shocked mind could barely process it. One moment she was being held at gunpoint, the next she was free, huddled against the wall as Minho systematically dismantled her attackers. Not killing them. She registered that detail with a strange clarity. but disabling them with brutal efficiency, speaking in rapid Korean as he worked. When it was over, when the men lay groaning or unconscious on her kitchen floor, Min-ho turned to her. Blood spattered his once immaculate shirt. A cut above his eye leaked red down the side of his face. But his eyes were what stopped her heart. Completely empty of the warmth she'd come to expect. Cold, calculating, assessing damage with clinical detachment. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice flat. Zora touched her temple, her fingers coming away bloody from where she'd been struck. "Not seriously." Min-ho nodded once, then turned to the man he'd left conscious, the leader. He spoke in Korean, voice devoid of emotion. And though Zora couldn't understand the words, she understood the tone. This was Min-ho Park, heir to a criminal empire, delivering judgment. The man responded, his tone desperate, pleading. Min-ho's expression didn't change. He spoke again, a final-sounding pronouncement, then turned back to Zora. "My men will be here in 2 minutes," he said, still in that emotionless voice. "They'll clean this up. You won't be implicated. These men will never bother you again." "Min-ho," Zora began, but he cut her off with a raised hand. "Don't, please." For the first time, emotion cracked through his facade. Pain, regret, self-loathing. "I did this to you. I brought this danger to your door despite every promise I made. I thought I could have both worlds, you and this life I'm trying to escape. I was wrong." Sirens wailed in the distance, growing closer. Someone had heard the gunshot, called the police. Min-ho's expression shifted to resignation. "My men will handle the police," he said. "Tell them you were closing up when 3 men tried to rob you. You didn't see their faces. They ran when they heard sirens." "And you?" Zora asked, already knowing the answer. "I can't be here when they arrive." Min-ho finally moved toward her, hesitating before gently touching her injured temple. "I'm so sorry, Zora. You deserve better than this. Better than me. Don't you dare make that decision for me," she said fiercely, grabbing his wrist. "Don't you dare walk away thinking it's for my own good." Pain twisted Min-ho's features. "Look at what I brought into your life. Look at what almost happened to you tonight. I'm looking at a man who came when I needed him, who protected me, who is fighting to be better than his circumstances." Zora tightened her grip on his wrist. "I knew who you were, Min-ho. I chose this, chose you with my eyes open." For a moment, she thought she'd reached him, but then car doors slammed outside, and Min-ho pulled away. "I'll contact you when it's safe," he said, "when I've dealt with this threat permanently." "Min-ho, wait!" But he was already gone, disappearing through a back exit as his men entered through the front, seamlessly taking control of the scene seconds before police burst through the door with weapons drawn. True love doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you were meant to become. Hit subscribe if you believe transformation is worth the pain it requires. Only those who fear growth will turn away. For 2 weeks, Zora heard nothing from Min-ho. His security remained. She spotted them occasionally outside her restaurant or apartment, but the man himself had vanished. She threw herself into work, into creating new menu items, into anything that would distract her from the memory of Min-ho's blood-spattered face and empty eyes. On the 15th day, Mrs. Park appeared at her restaurant just before opening. "May I come in?" the elderly woman asked, looking smaller somehow, more fragile than Zora remembered. "Of course." Zora led her to a quiet table, signaling to her staff that they needed privacy. "Can I get you anything?" "Tea. Just answers." Mrs. Park folded her hands on the table. "My son has locked himself away. He works constantly, speaks to no one, eats only when I force him. He is destroying himself and I don't know why." Zora's heart ached. "He hasn't told you?" "He tells me nothing. But I know it involves you." Mrs. Park reached across the table, gripping Zora's hand with surprising strength. "He was changing with you, becoming the man I always knew he could be. Now he is slipping back into his father's shadow." "There was an incident," Zora said carefully. "Some men came to my restaurant. They wanted to use me to get to Min-ho." Mrs. Park closed her eyes briefly. "And my son, He stopped them. But the way he did it... Zora shook her head, still struggling with the memory. It was like he became someone else. Someone cold, efficient, dangerous. Not someone else, Mrs. Park corrected gently. That is who he has always been, who his father made him to be. The man you know. The one who speaks of food with passion, who laughs at your jokes, who looks at you like you hang the moon. That is the man fighting to emerge. He pushed me away, Zora said, the pain of it still fresh. Said he was protecting me. Men, Mrs. Park said with a dismissive wave. Always thinking they know what's best for women who are stronger than they can imagine. She squeezed Zora's hand. My son is at our family home. The address is in this envelope. Go to him, Zora. Remind him that running away is not the same as protecting someone. What if he doesn't want to see me? Mrs. Park smiled, suddenly looking years younger. He wants nothing more in this world than to see you. His pride and fear are the only things standing in his way. The Park family home was not what Zora expected. No mansion, no ostentatious display of wealth. Just a beautiful traditional Korean-style house set on several acres outside the city, surrounded by carefully tended gardens and high walls that spoke more of privacy than security. The housekeeper who answered her knock seemed unsurprised by her arrival, leading her through the house to a back garden where Min-ho sat alone, surrounded by paperwork, a half-empty bottle of soju on the table beside him. You shouldn't be here, he said without looking up, clearly assuming she was a staff member. Probably not, Zora agreed. But your mother can be very persuasive. Min-ho's head snapped up, shock evident on his face. He looked terrible. Unshaven, dark circles under his eyes, thinner than he'd been 2 weeks ago. But he was still the most beautiful man Zora had ever seen. Zora, he breathed her name like a prayer. What are you doing here? Apparently saving you from yourself. She sat down across from him, uninvited. You look awful. A ghost of a smile touched his lips. Always so direct. Someone has to be. She gestured at the paperwork surrounding him. What is all this? Min-ho hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. Transfer documents, contracts, legal filings. I'm dismantling my father's organization piece by piece. The legitimate parts are being restructured under new management, trusted people who know nothing about the original sources of funding. The illegitimate parts are being shut down, with financial support to help the people who depended on them transition to legal employment. Zora stared at him, understanding dawning. You're walking away from everything. Yes. Min-ho met her gaze steadily. After what happened at your restaurant, I realized I couldn't keep straddling both worlds. I couldn't keep pretending I could be two different people. The heir to my father's criminal enterprise and the man who... He trailed off. The man who what? Zora pressed. The man who loves you, Min-ho said simply. Because I do love you, Zora. Enough to let you go. Enough to ensure that my world can never touch yours again. That's the stupidest thing I've ever heard, Zora said, but there was no heat in her words. You don't protect people by abandoning them, Min-ho. You protect them by becoming someone who doesn't put them in danger in the first place. She gestured at the papers. Which is exactly what you're doing now. It's not that simple. There will be consequences. People who feel betrayed. Rivals who see an opportunity. Min-ho ran a hand through his disheveled hair. It could get worse before it gets better. Then we face it together. Zora reached across the table, placing her hand over his. That's what partners do. Partners, Min-ho repeated, as if testing the word. Is that what we are? That's what we could be. If you stop making unilateral decisions about our relationship and start treating me like someone capable of making her own choices. Zora tightened her grip on his hand. I choose you, Min-ho. The man you are and the man you're trying to become. But you have to choose me too, not just the idea of me but the reality. A woman who doesn't need protection as much as she needs honesty and partnership. For a long moment, Min-ho just looked at her, his expression unreadable. Then, slowly, he turned his hand beneath hers, intertwining their fingers. I choose you, he said quietly. I always have, from the moment you told me to wait my turn in your restaurant. I just didn't think I deserved to be chosen in return. Well, get used to it, Zora said, squeezing his hand. Because I'm not going anywhere. What Zora couldn't know, what Minho himself couldn't fully predict, was how completely their lives would intertwine from that moment. How her restaurant would become the model for a legitimate business empire that would eclipse his father's criminal organization in both profit and influence. How his connections would help her expand into international markets she'd never dreamed of reaching. How together they would create something neither could have built alone. 1 year later, on New Year's Eve, Minho took his mother and Zora to the restaurant where it all began. Fusion was booked solid, of course, but this time Minho had made a reservation months in advance, securing the best table in the house. As midnight approached, as the restaurant buzzed with anticipation for the new year, Minho reached across the table, taking Zora's hand in his. A year ago, I walked into this restaurant an angry, isolated man, trapped in a legacy I didn't choose, he said quietly. Tonight, I'm here as the man I was always meant to be, because of you. Not because of me, Zora corrected gently. You were always this man. You just needed someone to see it. My son was always destined for greatness, Mrs. Park interjected, her eyes twinkling with mischief and affection. He just needed a woman strong enough to match him. I knew from the moment you stood up to him that you were that woman. As the countdown to midnight began, Minho reached into his pocket, producing a small black box that made Zora's breath catch. I don't want to begin another year without knowing you'll be by my side for all the years to come, he said, opening the box to reveal a ring that somehow managed to be both elegant and understated, perfectly suited to Zora's taste. Will you marry me, Zora Johnson? Will you continue to challenge me, to push me to be better, to build something extraordinary together? Zora looked at the man before her. No longer the dangerous stranger who had walked into her restaurant a year ago, not quite the polished businessman he presented to the world, but something uniquely his own. A man who had fought his way out of darkness. A man who had chosen love over legacy, growth over power. Yes, she said as the crowd around them counted down the final seconds of the year. Yes to all of it. As midnight struck, as cheers erupted around them, Minho slipped the ring onto Zora's finger and sealed their promise with a kiss. Mrs. Park watched with tears in her eyes, knowing that her son had finally found his way home. What had begun with an arrogant demand for a table had transformed into something neither of them could have imagined. A partnership that transcended cultural differences, that defied expectations, that proved that sometimes the most unexpected encounters truly could change everything. True love doesn't change who you are, it reveals who you were meant to become. Hit that subscribe button if you believe transformation through love is the most powerful journey we can take. Those afraid to become their best selves will never understand the beauty of being truly seen and loved anyway.